Title: She was sold at auction for her medical skill. The hot desert sun blazed down on the small frontier town of Dry Creek, its wooden buildings casting long, jagged shadows across the dusty streets. The townsfolk gathered in a chaotic crowd outside the town's central square, voices rising and falling like the desert wind. A wooden platform had been erected in the middle, and atop it stood a young woman, her wrists tied with rough rope. Her dress was simple, dusty, and torn at the hem. Her brown hair clung to her sweat-streaked face, and her green eyes scanned the crowd, alert, yet fearful. Her name was Elara Hayes. In the last year, she had traveled from one settlement to another, using her medical knowledge to patch up the injured and care for the sick. It was an unusual skill for a woman on the frontier, and it had brought her both respect and danger. Now, she found herself at the mercy of men who saw her not as a healer, but as a commodity. A grizzled auctioneer cleared his throat and shouted, "Do I hear $50 for the lady with the hands that heal?" The crowd laughed and jeered, but Elara's stomach knotted tighter with every call. She had been sold once before, back east, but the man had died in a train robbery, leaving her freedom hanging by a thread. Now, the fate of her life and honor rested on the whims of strangers. From the corner of her eye, she saw a lone figure riding toward the auction square. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his sharp features. Dust swirled around the boots of his black horse, and there was an intensity in his gait that set him apart from the others. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, surveying the scene with cool detachment, as if calculating risk and reward with every second. The auctioneer's voice rose again. 70. Do I hear 80? 100. Going once, going twice, sold. A man in a dark coat slapped down a handful of coins and grinned. Elara's heart sank. She was now the property of a stranger, and though she did not yet know him, she sensed that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. That evening, she followed the stranger, her buyer, through the narrow streets of Dry Creek. His name, he told her curtly, was Cade Lawson, a bounty hunter of some renown. He did not speak much, but there was a strange kindness in his eyes, a contradiction she could not place. He had purchased her for her medical skill, he said, but his reasons were veiled. Perhaps he needed someone to patch up the men in his posse, or perhaps he saw an opportunity to save a life only she could. The cabin he led her to was small but clean, the smell of pine and tobacco filling the air. Cade motioned for her to sit. "You'll have freedom here," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "You do your work, you eat well, and you sleep without chains. But don't try anything foolish." Elara's first night alone in the cabin was restless. She could hear the desert wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the distant cries of coyotes. Her mind raced with worry. What kind of man had bought her, and why? She had spent her life helping others, but now she felt like prey in a world that did not value a healer's heart. The days passed slowly, and with each one, she observed Cade more closely. He was disciplined, calculating, but not cruel. He carried himself with the authority of a man who had seen too much death, yet in his presence, she felt a flicker of safety. Then, one night, everything changed. A scream echoed through the night. Elara leapt from her bed, grabbing her medical satchel instinctively. Outside, a small group of outlaws had cornered a family on the outskirts of town. Their horses stomped and kicked, their weapons gleaming in the lantern light. Cade was already there, firing with deadly accuracy, moving like a shadow in the dust. "Elara," he shouted, "get inside. I'll hold them off." But she could not. Her instincts overrode fear. She ran toward the injured child lying beneath a toppled cart, bleeding from a deep gash on his leg. Her hands shook as she tore a strip of cloth to tie a tourniquet, whispering prayers under her breath. The boy's mother screamed, clutching his hand as bullets ricocheted dangerously close. Cade covered her from behind, his eyes never leaving the attackers. The night stretched on like an eternity. Elara worked tirelessly, her skills tested by panic, dust, and the cries of the injured. Cade fought like a man possessed, and when the outlaws finally fled, both were drenched in sweat and blood, their hearts racing. It was in that moment, amidst the chaos, that a fragile bond formed between them. He had bought her for her skill, yes, but he had come to rely on her courage as much as her knowledge. Days turned into weeks. Elara continued to care for the wounded, traveling with Cade as he delivered bounty, and each journey revealed more of the man behind the stoic facade. He spoke little of his past, only fragments: a brother lost to a gang, a town burned to the ground, a promise he could not keep. Elara listened, offering comfort where she could, but her own wounds were hidden beneath careful smiles. She had been sold, yes, but she had never sold her soul. And Cade, for all his harshness, treated her with an unexpected respect that stirred feelings she could not name. Then came the test. A notorious gang, the Red Viper Band, had kidnapped a child from a nearby settlement, demanding ransom or death. Cade rode at dawn with Elara by his side, knowing the odds were slim. The desert stretched endlessly, and the sun beat down mercilessly, but they pressed on. When they found the gang's hideout, it was a scene of terror, a small cabin surrounded by armed men, their eyes cold and cruel. Elara's heart pounded. She could treat wounds, but could she survive bullets and betrayal? Cade whispered instructions. I'll create a diversion. You go for the child. She nodded, gripping her satchel tightly. Time slowed as she slipped into the shadows, weaving through the chaos with her knowledge of anatomy guiding her movements. When she reached the child, a young boy of no more than 8, she saw the terror in his wide eyes and felt a surge of protective instinct. A gunshot rang out. Cade's voice shouted her name. She turned to see him wounded, a deep cut across his shoulder. Panic rose, but she swallowed it down. Using her satchel, she tore a strip of cloth and bound the wound, guiding Cade toward the escape. The outlaws were in pursuit, but the bond between them, forged in danger and respect, made them an unstoppable team. By nightfall, they were safe, the boy reunited with his family, and Cade leaning heavily against Elara for support. It was then, in the quiet after the storm, that words unspoken became clear. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the campfire. I didn't just buy you for your skill, he said, voice roughened by emotion. I needed you. Not just to save others, but me. Elara's throat tightened. She had feared being property, feared being a tool for someone else's gain, but now she understood. Freedom could be given even in chains, trust could be built even in darkness, and love could bloom even in the harshest deserts. Cade smiled faintly, letting the tension slip for a moment. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently. But I can't. All I can do now is make sure you're never sold again. Not to anyone. Not ever. She reached for his hand, roughened by years of work and danger, and squeezed it. Then let's start over, she whispered. Together. The desert wind carried their promise, and for the first time, Dry Creek did not feel like a place of chains and fear, but a place where courage, healing, and love could thrive. The auction had been cruel, but it had led her here, to a life she could finally call her own, and to a man who would fight by her side, not just for gold, but for the hope they both had longed for. And so, under the vast, star-strewn sky, the healer and the bounty hunter rode together, not as master and purchased, but as equals, bound by trust, courage, and the strange, enduring magic of the Wild West.